We are now 3 weeks into a season that could have been and should have been the most exciting since 2017. The Eagles were primed to take the league by storm in 2020, but what we have seen so far is an embarrassment from top to bottom. The more worrying part here, though, is that the winds of change might not be blowing anytime soon. I think the Eagles are forcing themselves into a rebuild, but the questions are who, and more importantly, why. This is exactly what we're going to break down in today's video, but the only thing I will ask from you is patience, because I know that saying the Eagles, who are a few years removed from a Super Bowl and have reached the playoffs in each of the last 3 years and paid their quarterback $154 million, saying they're forcing a rebuild, it sounds like a hot take. All I ask is that you lend me your time to explain why it isn't, and that we need to have a serious discourse about what goes on behind the scenes, because there are some serious details that we all seem to be overlooking here. While you're sticking around, it will be amazing if you could hit that subscribe button. We've got plenty of Eagles content coming up for you in the near future, and as always, if you haven't already, phillysportsnetwork.com is where you can get this kind of analysis from myself and all of our writers, where we just want to be the change in Philly media and bring you something fresh and unique every single day, so make sure you're checking us out. Okay, so before we dive into this, let's just take a look at the bigger picture. The Eagles are projected to be $84 million over the cap space next season. If there was ever a season not to be forcing a rebuild, this is it, right? Like, it makes sense. 2020 was supposed to be the year of licking the stamp and sending it at 100 miles an hour, throwing the kitchen sink. The roster was built to win now and have enough raw speed and potential to develop under the radar. At 0-2-1, that clearly isn't happening. Carson Wentz looks like a shadow of his former self, Doug Peterson needs switching off and on again like a fridge, and there are several discrepancies that point towards a fire that's burning inside the NovaCare complex that are invisible to the naked eye, and that's where the problems start. I want to turn back time to the very start of this offseason, and more specifically a press conference given by Howie Roseman and Doug Peterson. Yes, both guys will be back, is what the Eagles head coach said very confidently when asked whether or not offensive coordinator Mike Groh and wide receiver coach Carson Wentz would return in 2020. Fine, we all thought that would be the last we hear of it. Less than 24 hours later, they were fired. Regardless of whether Peterson was refusing to throw his staff under the bus or if he was undermined by Jeffrey Lurie, the fact the trigger was pulled so soon after his assurances to their stability of their job should have raised red flags there and then. But for whatever reason, it didn't, and I think largely because the public perception was that Mike Groh was a huge problem for this Eagles offense that couldn't start fast, that couldn't put points up early, that was really stagnating guys like Nelson Aguilar and JJ Arcega-Whiteside by asking them to do too much. Of course, the wide receiver coach and the offensive coordinator would be out the door and the fans would love it. But looking back, it was the first visible sign to the public that there could well be a disconnect between the coaching staff and the front office, at least this season. If you go back even further, you see a pattern of particular molds of players drafted. Take someone like Rasul Douglas, for example, who just doesn't fit what the coaches wanted, and no matter how well they did, was always on the outside looking in. Subsequently, for this example, he's now flourishing in Carolina. There was a report during the heart of last season where the Eagles defense was suffering some of its worst performances we'd seen in recent memory, stating that the front office wanted to bring in star linebacker Jamie Collins that offseason, but it was Jim Schwartz who lobbied for Zach Brown. Schwartz got his wish, but Brown barely made it a month into the season before being cut. That was another glimpse into someone maybe having more pull-on personnel than we realised, or the front office trying to say, hey, look at us, it's not us, it's all Jim Schwartz, and throwing their coach under the bus. Maybe not the first time they've undermined one. Whatever the reasoning was, it was very peculiar that this information only came out when the defense was struggling and when Schwartz was being called into question, and then magically the next few games, the defense makes all the adjustments that fans had been begging for in the weeks before that. So whatever the reasoning for that article was, it certainly lit a fire under Jim Schwartz, who, as we will figure out later in this video, has much more impact on this current situation than we may realise. Phase 2 is all about the quarterbacks, the quarterback factory if you will. And if we fast forward to this year's NFL draft, one quote stands out from Jeffrey Lurie, and it was actually mentioned during last year's offseason. I would expect us, if not every year, every other year, to try to find a quarterback. Those were the words from the Eagles owner. Now, the drafting of Clayton Thorson, Clayton Thorson went down like a lead balloon, but Lurie stuck to his word. Now, is it possible that he was the one that lobbied for Jalen Hurts to be taken in the second round? It's certainly not out of the equation, right? The problem is though, and this is where the discrepancies start to come up, that there were clear primary needs that remained unaddressed to that point. The Eagles had only picked one receiver, that had one pick before that selection. Those same needs that went unaddressed are stinging the Eagles right now. Linebacker, cornerback, safety, even defensive end depth could have been addressed with the Jalen Hurts pick. Instead, they drafted a Heisman Trophy runner-up who took his first snaps at quarterback this past Sunday, and the knock-on effects of this were evident. Now, very, very few people will ever truly know how Carson Wentz took this decision, but it'd be very easy to understand a level of frustration and relate to a whole range of emotions. A report came out much later citing that many of his teammates also felt the same way. Wentz had already battled through so much adversity on and off the field up to that point. From an ACL tear where he then later had to watch Nick Foles win it all while he sat powerless on the sideline, to getting injured 1 year later and seeing shrines to his backup made inside the same building where a statue of him stands just meters away. It hasn't been easy. To every skill position player to ever put on a jersey, and the iconic anonymous source scandal. He has dealt with so much to get to this point, and just when the ground had leveled out, the carpet gets ripped from under his feet once again. The rest of the draft was based on one word: speed. Howie Roseman had seen enough in the playoff loss to Seattle, promising fans that they will not let history repeat itself, and the same two words were echoed by the GM all off season long: speed and youth. They were clear focuses in the draft process too, but this is where things really begin to get murky. Take third round pick Davion Taylor for example. If you've been watching Eagles football this season and didn't really bother with the draft process, you won't know who this man is, and that's because he hasn't played a snap yet. The linebacker's college tape was puzzling at best. He's an athletic freak of nature, no doubt, but an NFL ready player, severe doubt. Taylor was unable to play football in high school due to being a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which meant that when he got to Colorado, it was obviously a massive step behind everyone else. His play was mired by mental lapses, poor positioning, and a reliance on his athletic ability to bail him out of trouble, something that just won't be enough against the best athletes on the planet. With that same selection, the team could have gotten someone like Akeem Davis-Gaither, who already has more NFL tackles then Taylor has snaps. What many fans will find puzzling though is that surely Taylor cannot be worse than Nate Gary, who has been about as useful as a cloth in a flash flood this season, giving up 2 touchdowns and running around like a headless chicken. But still, Jim Schwartz insists on playing his guys. Marcus Epps is another who, outside of one pass breakup last week, has struggled massively. All while 4th round selection Kayvon Wallace sits on the sideline, twiddling his thumbs and playing Candy Crush. Let's not forget Jannard Avery, a 3rd year defensive end who was traded for at the deadline last year in exchange for a 4th round pick. He's played 31 snaps in 3 games. These are just a few examples that highlight a very clear disconnect, and we can include the Zach Brown example in that as well. It's as if the front office want to build a certain style of roster, but the coaches want to play a very certain style of football that totally contrasts this, and neither party want to budge. So the front office keep drafting their guys, and the coaching staff keep starting their guys, and what you're seeing is tension building over time, and eventually it's going to bubble over, and that's what we're seeing this season. If you don't believe me, now's the time you need to buckle up that seatbelt. Let's look at the season so far. The team is falling apart at the seams, and the first real alarm bells started to ring when Jalen Reagor went down with an injury. He'd led the receiving group in snaps at that point, but had half the targets of Deshaun Jackson. Does that not sound a little bit weird? The Eagles are still running the majority of their offense out of 12 personnel, focusing all of their efforts over the middle and into the hands of their franchise tight ends. Now, this makes sense from a game planning standpoint, why wouldn't it? It's been the shape of the Eagles offense for several years now. You've got two great talents there, and of course it aids the run game as well. But it begs the question why the Eagles spent so many resources on wideouts if the team is still besotted with using the run to set up play action and rely on tight ends. Away from the field, things only get worse. A report came out stating Doug Peterson had reached his limit, and now he started snapping at reporters. 1 minute he's asked Jimmy Kempski if he's ever played quarterback in the NFL when asked about Carson Wentz. Today he said that reporters would be mad at him even if the team were 3-0 instead of just answering the questions. He looks bothered and angry and miserable in press conferences now, and I don't know where this is coming from, because it's not like the Eagles are always red hot to start the year and Peterson is a suddenly stranger to adversity. He's dealt with injuries before. He's had to drag the team back from the brink pretty much every time he's been here. He's dealt with anonymous sources, with contract holdouts. None of this is new. It wouldn't suddenly get to a point where he can't handle it. But nothing until this point has prompted such a juvenile reaction before, so why would it now? I don't know, but you get to week 3, the icing on the cake came on Sunday. Instead of trusting Jake Elliott to kick a 64-yard field goal with 19 seconds left of overtime, Peterson decided to punt the ball and avert the risk of the Bengals having a short field to work with. The same Bengals who had 25 offensive yards in overtime, and the same Bengals who had allowed Joe Burrow to be hit 18 times up to that point. This decision, this total lack of faith, left a very sour taste in the mouths of Eagles fans, and it's not one Doug Peterson has often been associated with making. Typically known as one of the most aggressive coaches in the league, always trusting his guys on 4th down and in 2-point conversions, Peterson buckled. He threw in the towel and he gave up. Maybe tensions are finally rising. You can only shake a bottle of soda so much before the lid blows off. Whatever is going on behind the scenes, it's not new. This is just the latest chapter in a novel that appears to be reaching a very dramatic climax. It could be argued that Lurie maybe waited too long to get rid of Andy Reid, and that eventually Doug Peterson was their 3rd or 4th choice head coach at the time, and had it not been for that Super Bowl win, maybe that could have ended very differently. We don't know what's happened, but the team has taken a step back every year since the Super Bowl. They then draft another quarterback. You've got owner intervention. You've got a coaching staff that refuse to play the talents that are drafted and insist on playing their guys. You've then got rookies and draftees that just aren't developing, aren't getting anywhere. You've got coaches that are taking shots at reporters, and a franchise quarterback who went from being a borderline MVP to someone who is almost playing as bad as Mitchell Trubisky, and that is not acceptable. None of this is acceptable, and it's like the Eagles are forcing themselves to blow the lid off the whole thing so they can start again and do things the right way. But the question is, which way is the right way? Is it the way of the coaching staff or the way of the front office? And that's where we are at crossroads. Why? Which side is Jeffrey Lurie on? Is he on Team Howie? Is he on Team Doug? Guys, I want to know your thoughts on this. Have I gone insane? Is this season just too much and I've lost the plot, or is there something here? Is there substance to this theory? Let me know in the comments. From myself, Liam Jenkins, thank you for lending me your eyes and ears. I'll see you very soon.